Good evening. I'm Kate Marina, Associate Director of Membership at the San Diego Museum of Art, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Virtual Friends Lecture for Cranach to Canaletto, Masterpieces from the Bemberg Foundation. Thank you for being here with us tonight virtually, and thank you for your ongoing support of the museum through your membership. Tonight we're celebrating the opening of the new exhibition, Cranach to Canaletto, Masterpieces from the Bemberg Foundation, which opened at the museum last Friday. The exhibition is composed entirely of works from the Bemberg Foundation, based in Toulouse, France, and is co-curated by Philippe Crow, Director of the Bemberg Foundation, and Michael Brown, Ph.D., Curator of European Art at the San Diego Museum of Art. Built by Argentina-born French collector and Harvard-trained scholar Georges Bemberg, the collection ranges from Venetian portraits and view paintings to masterworks of the German and French Renaissance. This exhibition features over 80 works produced between about 1500 and 1800 by some of the biggest names in European painting, and it marks the first time these works have been publicly shown in the US. It's my great pleasure to introduce our presenter tonight, Michael Brown, Ph.D., Curator of European Art and co-curator of this extraordinary exhibition. Since joining the museum in 2014, Michael Brown has overseen the complete redesign of the museum's galleries of European art, as well as the acquisition of works by Zurbaran, Valdes Leal, Ribera, Juan de Mesa, Sorolla, Goltzius, and Lucas Cranach. While completing his doctoral dissertation at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts on 17th and 18th century portraiture in Mexico, Brown served as the Mayer Curatorial Fellow at the Denver Art Museum. He has taught at the University of Colorado and the University of Denver and is the author of numerous articles on Spanish portraiture and the history of collecting Hispanic art. His recent exhibitions at the San Diego Museum of Art include Divine Desire, Printmaking, Mythology, and the Birth of the Baroque, Venetian Views, Bruegel to Canaletto, Masterpieces from the Grisette Collection, Art and Empire, The Golden Age of Spain, and currently on view at the museum, Juan Sanchez Cotan and Colleen Smith, Mystical Time and Deceptive Light, along with the accompanying exhibition catalog. Michael, thank you so much for being here with us tonight to talk about this exceptional new exhibition.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was a very generous introduction, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you, all of our friends that are joining us on this live virtual event. Thank you for your support over the course of the pandemic. The light is at the end of the tunnel. The museum is really thriving, and the galleries are wonderful right now. It's great to see visitors back, and I look forward to being able to welcome you all in person back to the museum next time you come in. Tonight, I wanted to cover a few different aspects of the exciting and really unique Bemberg Foundation exhibition, Cranach to Canaletto, that's on right now, with a few scenes of behind the installation of the show, behind the planning for the show, and the logistics, which were all just a little bit different because of the pandemic and some of the travel restrictions. We did a lot of the planning phases virtually with our partners in Europe. And if we can move to the first slide, this is the opening graphics for the show, designed by Noel Kane, and you can see in the next slide the permanent home of the Bemberg Foundation and its collection. This is the Hôtel d'Asseza in Toulouse, in France, and the 16th century building is getting a renovation right now, which provided the opportunity for its director and our director, Roxana Velasquez, to negotiate the tour of the works that are on view. And we are the only U.S. venue for this show, and it's really a once in a lifetime opportunity for our friends and our members and our visitors to get a chance to see these great works of art. If we could move to the next slide. Here's George Bemberg himself, and he was as Kate outlined earlier, a Argentina-born French collector, scholar, writer, musician. He was educated at Harvard, and he made regular trips to New York City. Although he lived primarily in Paris, he would have annual visits to New York, and often that was one of the places where he would make acquisitions to grow his collection. One of the interesting stories was, I love working with collectors because they always have a very personal insight and a personal aesthetic that oftentimes is built over the years. And I got to know George Bemberg's eye through his works. He was born in 1915 and died in 2011. So I never got a chance to meet him in person. However, getting to know his collection, you get to know his aesthetic and the types of things that he acquired with a clear view in mind. And he began collecting as a Harvard student. He bought his first work of art. We don't know what it is, but he bought his first work of art while he was at Harvard on a trip to New York. And from there, it just grew. The common theme among collectors is really, that first bite, and he certainly experienced that, and really never stopped. And he set up the foundation in order to preserve his collection, and it is on view to the public in Toulouse and now in San Diego. So we're very grateful to our colleagues at the Bemberg Foundation for the opportunity to show over 80 paintings. So if we could move forward another slide, you can see the interior of the Hôtel d'Asseza, a very antique European feel to the installation, which our friends might be familiar with similar institutions in Europe, like the Wallace Collection, or in New York, the Frick Collection, where antique furniture and bronzes and wallpaper and other decorative arts are mixed in with the paintings for a very period feel. The challenge for us was to interpret the collection in a way that would be exciting for our friends and members and visitors, and also allow for individual connections to be made from one century to the next, or from one geography to the next. So if we can move forward again, we'll see another view. I think we can take an even closer look here of the portrait, one of the portrait galleries, and you can see one of the stars of our show on the right, which is Tintoretto's presentation in the temple. We can move on. And beautiful selection of furniture and porcelain and these cameos, along with one of the Hubert Robert paintings in the middle here that is on view here in San Diego, along with it's flanked by two French interior scenes that I'll talk about in just a minute. We can go on. Two of the more recent acquisitions of the Bemberg Foundation. What George Bemberg did was, in setting up the foundation, was he gave them the opportunity and the financial ability to continue making acquisitions in the spirit of his collection. And we have several of those newer acquisitions on view. These two are by the French Caravaggisti painter, kind of a devotee of Caravaggio, Nicolas Tournier, painted just after his return from Rome, in 1625. We can move on. The first section of the exhibition is devoted to portraits and beauty and the changing attitudes towards portraits, both royal and otherwise, throughout mostly the 16th and the 18th century. We have one very important 17th century example that we'll look at, and if we could move to the next slide. In the planning phases, we kind of, and the museum's exhibitions designer, head of exhibitions, Paul Bruin, lays out the floor plan and makes 3D walkthroughs of how the exhibition might look. And so this is a very early exploration of the first gallery as we move through. And then if we can move on to the next slide. This is the walls after the first construction is done and the painting has been done. We came up with a color plan or a color scheme of 4 colors. And as you move through the 4 sections of the show, the colors are meant to signal to our visitors the change in theme. And in this case, the walls are meant to harmonize with certain signature pieces throughout each section. And the archways also that are subtly included in each section are hark back to the classicizing or Renaissance architectural style of the Hôtel de César in Toulouse. And so each of these archways was designed to house a signature work. And this is the one with the first Lucas Cranach in the show that we'll see. We can go on to the next slide. As the works began coming in, this is another kind of behind the scenes shot. As the paintings started coming in, we would have a FaceTime session with the painting's conservator in France, bearing in mind the change, the time change was quite significant. So that was one challenge, but she was willing to work quite late at night. And here's one of our the Balboa Art Conservation Center's paintings conservators, Morgan, looking over one of the works before it's okayed to be installed. So it's a huge team effort to install the show, and we can go on to the next slide. This is one of the Lucas Cranachs being taken out of its crate. Everything is documented, and we do something called condition reporting, which is the inspection of the work as it enters the building, and then we do the same on the way back. So when we send the works back, they go through the same meticulous process. If we could go on to the next slide. Here is our first work in the show, Lucas Cranach, the Elder's portrait of Sybil of Cleves, who was the consort electress of Saxony. She is the queen of the Saxon realm, and painted at a time, 1531, that was a real watershed in the history of Western civilization. And Saxony played a role much larger than its geographical area would suggest. And because not only was there political strife and warfare going on in Europe at the time, especially between Saxony and the Holy Roman Emperor, but also between Spain and other great powers in Europe. Sybil of Cleves herself played a huge role in ruling her realm of Saxony. Her husband, John Frederick, had been imprisoned by Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, as a sort of political ploy to help keep Saxony safe from a much stronger force in the Holy Roman Empire. And he was imprisoned for 5 years, during which Sybil of Cleves led her country and their armed forces, and also she ruled Saxony at a time when Martin Luther was rising to the forefront, and this was the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. And Lucas Cranach himself was not only the official court painter to the electors or rulers, monarchs of Saxony. He and his sons were also the official painters to Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. So the two are constantly intertwined. Anyway, this is a fabulous portrait in which the sitter is portrayed in this incredible orange outfit and headdress with a gold chain around her neck, an emerald encrusted necklace, and the embroidery on her chest is her initials and the word "most serene." And this was her virtue in the face of the great adversity on the part of Saxony, in the face of this much larger entity. She was brave and virtuous, and I think that Lucas Cranach was ideal at capturing this. He includes nothing in the background but this blue flat monochromatic background, so as to detract nothing from the sitter herself. She is the icon of the land that she ruled, and Cranach is a master of detail, but also of not confusing or interrupting the viewer's concentration on the most important part of the composition, which is the face and the attire of the sitter herself. It's just a phenomenal picture. And if we could go to the next. In the same room is Andrea Previtali's masterful portrait of a young man wearing a black hat. We can see he's has a collar of ermine, which is a very luxurious fur that was worn primarily by the highest of nobility and monarchs and popes throughout Europe. And so we know that this is a man of very high social standing. We haven't identified him, but Previtali, like Lucas Cranach, also follows this, in this case, green monochromatic background. Previtali came out of the Bellini workshop along with two very important Venetian painters, Giorgione, who is well represented, of course, in San Diego, because we're only one of two museums in the United States that has a Giorgione, and Titian. And so you can see some similarities between Previtali and Giorgione, who died very, very young, in his very early 30s. The Titian essentially would go on to become the longest lived of any of the Bellini proteges. If we could go to the next slide. This is one of the gems of the exhibition, and it's a small but jewel-like portrait of young King Charles IX, King of France, painted around 1566. And this is by Francois Clouet, royal painter, and he, like the two examples that I just showed by Previtali and by Lucas Cranach, he works with fine detail, and he wields a brush with very, very fine single hair brushes often, and to do essentially to bring hyperrealism to his work. And I love the detail of the two hands that sit as though they're coming out of the picture plane towards the viewer. They kind of rest on this framework and come into our space. It's a very modern kind of approach, and it's surprising when we find it after looking at the painting for quite some time and noting its its late Renaissance exquisite attention to the detail of the jewelry and the rough collar and the feather in the hat. And then we come down and we see this much less formal kind of placement of the fingers as they rest on the trompe-l'oeil frame and come into our space. It's really quite a wonderful, wonderful painting. Next, please. A very different style, Veronese, one of the three great Venetian painters of the later Renaissance. The others are Tintoretto and Titian. Here we see much looser brushwork. We call it painterly because we can see the painter at work, really, and the brushwork is visible. And it's a formal portrait of the Senator Daniele Barbaro, but then also a very sensitive, much less formal image of a young man on the left. And Veronese is perhaps underrated as a portraitist, but we have these two examples that show him as a master of the genre and really capable of capturing the personality of the sitter, especially in the young man who's casually resting his fingers over the gold chain around his neck, which is an indication of his social status. If we could go to the next. And one of my favorite paintings in the entire exhibition is this one by Elisabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun, who was among the most famous painters of her day and certainly most famous female painter of her day. And she was a member of the Academy in Paris. And when the French Revolution swept through Paris and France, the painters or the artists who had been involved with the royal family often lost favor. And we'll see that with a couple of different artists in the show. And it's given us an opportunity to talk about the kind of rises and falls of the different artists and their patronage, because as the royal family lost favor, so did the artists that worked for them. And in fact, with the case of Vigée-Lebrun, she and her daughter sought refuge outside of France. She feared for her life after the revolution and the beginning of the Reign of Terror. And she fled to Italy, where she painted this spectacular portrait of the Polish Countess of Cranach, a young woman in the guise of Flora, the Roman character who's often depicted with flowers in her hair. And she's, this is a painting all about the springtime of a new life and of fertility, and it's very sensitively done. It's signed and dated, and the two met in Rome, and Vigée-Lebrun ends up continuing this kind of self-imposed exile from France for about 12 years or so, and while she was away from France, her fame just kept growing and growing, and she would go from court to court, winning more and more commissions, and she would also travel to imperial court in St. Petersburg, and met artists and nobles and monarchs along the way. And so, in a way, this exile ended up securing her even more commissions than she would have had otherwise, and an international fame that surpassed most other painters of the century. And it's a terrific image, and it was very appropriate to open the show for Art Alive with this engaging portrait of Flora. And of course, they're elsewhere in the museum that was full of floral interpretation. So it's great. We can move on to the next. The second section, Faith and Mythology. In the portraiture section, we kind of got to see Bemberg's sensibility regarding kind of jewel-like and beautifully composed and colorful compositions. In Faith and Mythology, we get to see his interest in Lucas Cranach, and we can go to the next slide. We can see this is the transition from the portrait gallery into the one dedicated to faith and mythology. So this was a 3D design software that we were able to use to walk through the space, thanks to our designer, Paul Bruin. And if we go to the next, this is how it looked before any of the art started to arrive. And the next. This is one of the two Lucas Cranach paintings in this section, a very, very large panel, a wood panel, and it depicts Hercules and Omphale. And Hercules had been the son of Jupiter, or Zeus, and a mortal woman. And Zeus's wife, the queen of the gods, Hera, was justifiably unhappy that her husband was carrying on, and so she made life very difficult for Hercules along the way. And at one point, this was the source of the famous 10 labors of Hercules, which were which he had to do in penance for killing his family after Hera threw him into a fit of rage. And later, he also, because of Hera's a spell that Hera cast on him, he killed his good friend Iphitus. And in penance for that, according to the Oracle of Delphi, Hercules was indentured for a period of 3 years to the Lydian queen Omphale. And one of the scenes that became very popular in the 16th century, through printmaking especially, was this scene of the great hero, the great strongman Hercules, being dressed by the queen's ladies in waiting. And here they're putting the queen's bonnet on Hercules. They've already taken away his lion skin, his signature, war club. And here they are giving her the queen's clothing and her distaff and spindle so that he can card and spin wool. And there are poetic lines inscribed above Hercules at the top, along with the signature, which is an insignia rather than a name. And it was this insignia that was essentially Lucas Cranach's knighthood, which was bestowed upon him by the Elector of Saxony, Frederick I. And so he used this emblem of the flying serpent as his signature instead of his name. And only he and his eldest son, Lucas Cranach the younger, were allowed to use this insignia. But here we can see the inscription includes Latin poetry, and this was most likely composed by Martin Luther's main intellectual advisor during the Protestant Reformation, the development of the Reformation, and so both court and Reformation kind of come together in these intellectual circles, and they're able to understand the Latin of the verses, and this was just viewed as a very humorous but also highly intellectual mythological scene, and it's also probably no mistake that later the Queen Sybil, or the Electress Sybil, was the sole ruler of Saxony at the time, and so the scenes of Omphale as this powerful queen who's assumed Hercules' attributes while he assumes hers would have been another layer of meaning. We can move on to the next slide. The jewel-like and intimate portrayals of the Virgin and Child that Bemberg chose to acquire, I think, are really indicative of this collector's eye that I referred to at the beginning. And here we have the Child in this really masterful small oil-on panel by Gérard David, very influential 16th century Flemish painter. We can see that these little details of how the Child thumbs through the book as his mother looks serenely down. She's looking at him in full foreknowledge of the events that would take his life, and so, but she's serene in her gaze and very motherly. And we can see a domestic interior, just the hint of a domestic interior in the back, with the candle. The candle is lit, and the panel is sort of the equivalent of one of those jewel-like portraits that I showed before, and it's really an indicator of the artist's taste in this case. We can move on. And to go back to a more amusing subject matter, we have Venus with Cupid stealing honey. And you can see the honeycomb in Cupid's hand. He's reached into this tree to remove it, and thus disturbing all the bees that were hard at work. And in the verses inscribed in the placard just at the top of the tree, we can see that again, this is probably the work of Philippe Melanchthon, who is the advisor to Martin Luther. He essentially puts words into Venus's mouth, and she's scolding Cupid here by saying how the stings of those bees are nothing compared to the arrows that he's known to sling at unsuspecting lovers, causing the greatest pain that they will know, and heartbreak, and so forth. So it's another humorous mythological composition set in a northern landscape. You can see the castle in the background. It's all kind of imaginary, and that's something that Cranach is really known for. And you can see, if you look at our recent acquisition by Lucas Cranach in the museum of the Nymph of the Spring, which also has Latin inscription, you can see similar northern landscape and of this very imaginary make-believe type of architecture. We can move on to the next slide. Finally, moving to the end of the faith and mythology section, we have two really stunning allegorical paintings by Francois Boucher, who is one of the 2 or 3 greatest Rococo painters in France in the 18th century, and he became these compositions of putti, these little winged infants, became incredibly popular with his clientele, and they were commissioned over and over again. And he would often paint the putti as symbols or allegories of the 5 senses, or the arts, or the 4 continents, that kind of thing. And in this case, this is one of a pair, and that's on display. And here, one of the winged infants is crowning the other, while there's sheet music in the back to the right, and cooing doves on the left, and a quiver of arrows. And so this would be, with the musical allegory, might be the sense of hearing for music. And Boucher, builds this kind of billowing kind of cloud on which the babies hover. And these are quite large paintings, and often they're done in groups for decorative concepts inside palaces and the residences of the aristocracy in France. We can move on to the next. One of my other really favorite paintings in the show is an oil sketch by Gian Domenico Tiepolo, the sketch for the Apotheosis of Hercules, who we were just talking about. And you can see him holding his club, wearing the lion skin, as he ascends into the pantheon of the gods after his mortal death. He was granted entry into Mount Olympus, and therefore immortality. And here he is during the apotheosis, or his entrance up into the heavens. And the oil sketch on canvas was a smaller study for an enormous project at the Imperial Palace in St. Petersburg, Russia, where Tiepolo did the ceiling fresco of this very scene. So we get to see the project at an earlier phase, and I think oil sketches are some of the most interesting of any oil paintings, because we get to see the artist in the planning phases. And we have a great Rubens oil sketch up in the galleries that I would encourage people to go examine after seeing this work here. We can move on to the next. The smallest section of the exhibition is actually one of the highlights, and it's a chance for painters and visitors to unravel the narratives and stories and clues that to unravel what's going on. If we take a look at the first painting, this is in pre-setup. This is a mock-up of how the signature work would look by Pietro Longhi. We could go to the next slide. The Pieter de Hoogh couple making music is a Dutch interior of the 17th century. One of the few 17th century paintings in the show, all of which are exquisite. But it's a quintessential Dutch interior in that there's more to it than we might initially realize. We have a central couple making music, the man holding the lute, the musical instrument, the dog walking past as a maid pours a glass of wine. In the background, we can see that there's a painting above the door, and it is Venus and Cupid again. And to the right of that is an embracing couple. So it's maybe a kind of an aristocratic tavern scene, but it's one in which Venus presides. And so it's one of romance and love, and we can see through the doorway into the outside, we can see this dramatic kind of late afternoon, early evening sunshine just flooding through the street, and the couple, the central couple here, are courting, and it's a quite a ritual. The dog here is a symbol of fidelity. We'll see another dog in just a little bit. If we could go to the next slide, we can see a less serene Flemish interior here by Peter Bruegel the Younger from 1610. And this scene, it looks like the tavern has gone in the wrong direction. And the key here is, although there's a lot of action in the center and in the left, if we look over at the young mother and the child who gestures towards what's happening, it's here that we, as any Dutch or Flemish contemporary would be able to discern, we can see the theme of the painting. And it is a Dutch proverb, which goes something like, as the old sing, so the young twitter. And essentially that means the children will imitate the behaviors of their parents, and here the behaviors are not so virtuous, and the dog is reacting in a disapproving manner, and there's a central conflict between a man wielding a knife over the food, and on the right, above the mother, is someone drinking ale straight from the serving jug, as a woman who has pickpocketed an older man flees out the door to the left. This is meant to be a humorous but instructive scene, and Bruegel was a master of doing scenes like this. So Peter de Hoogh, known as the more Vermeer-like serene interior, Bruegel and his rip-roaring tavern scenes were also equally popular. Okay, we can go on to the next. 2 centuries later, French painters would pick up on Peter de Hoogh's serene interiors, but also with intrigue and romance involved, and letter writing scenes were popular among the Dutch interior painters like Peter de Hoogh and also Gabriel Metsu. And you can see Metsu's work in the galleries, at least until the end of the summer. And the letters often indicate a romantic interest, and the French painters were certainly knowledgeable about the earlier Dutch examples, and musical instruments were often included, which had romantic subtexts, and here we can see that the young man and the young woman are romantically involved if you put all of the clues together. If we could go on to the next. And the signature work of this small section is Pietro Longhi's The Charlatan of 1757. And here, Pietro Longhi was a favorite among Venetians in the 18th century. His maybe more famous contemporaries, Canaletto, Bellotto, and Guardi, sold Venetian view paintings, or vedute in Italian, to the travelers and visitors, often from Great Britain, who were on the Grand Tour. Longhi approached Venetian society with a kind of more satirical approach, rather than making these big and very expensive souvenir paintings or view paintings. He would look to the interiors, he would look to the masked balls, he would look at the tiers of society, and with a satirical brush and composition, he would do things like the charlatan who's holding up, he's standing on a table holding up this kind of snake oil while a puppet show carries on behind him. And in the foreground, a well-to-do young woman and her gentleman escort come through. They've been enjoying the masked ball, and these are the carefree wealthy in Venice, and which was also known for its kind of lax moral code. And Pietro Longhi pokes fun at this by the inclusion of these revelers and enjoying the charlatan's show. But meanwhile, the charlatan's dog himself, that symbol of faith and fidelity, is asleep under the table, or it's an indication that faith and fidelity are absent from this scene. And it's really quite a multi-layered kind of look at Venetian society, which had its kind of seamier underbelly, as well as being, the most important stop on the Grand Tour for visitors to the Italian peninsula. If we could go to the next. The final section is devoted to outdoor pursuits, and we can have a look at the next slide, please. And this is in progress as we first start our way into the gallery before the works of art have arrived. We can go to the next slide now. And here is hanging one of the large-scale masterpieces by Hubert Robert. And then we can go to the next. The outdoor pursuits section features landscapes like this one by Jan van Goyen. And we can see this is a wonderful example of what's known as the monochromatic style of Dutch landscape of the Golden Age, in which the painter uses undulating light, almost in stripes, moving in a diagonal background, diagonal movement from the left, lower left up until the upper right, and sticking to a very controlled palette, and which is why he's known as a monochromatic painter of landscape. And it really gives a sense of grandeur and vastness of the sky in relation to the land. And the sea is a very important part of Dutch landscapes, because they had reclaimed so much of it with their engineering ingenuity and the series of dikes and that would protect against flooding. And they were constantly in danger of flooding, but through their man-made structures were able to claim a huge percentage of their actual land back from the sea. So these types of landscapes were incredibly popular at the time. This is a phenomenal example, and we can compare this to Dutch landscapes in our own collection as well. So so much of the Bemberg collection really offers a complement and an experience that, especially with the French and French paintings and the Italian paintings, things that we don't have in our collection, but that dialogue very well with similar things from other time periods or other geographies. So it was fun, to make connections between our permanent collection and the Bemberg Foundation's collection. If we can go on to the next. These two garden party scenes from the early part of the 18th century by Pater and Lancret indicate, again, Bemberg's eye for colorism and this these wonderful kind of carefree scenes of the 18th century in which the outdoors was such an important part of courtly life, courtly celebration, and often these outdoor activities would include comedic performances like we have on the right, or dancing, and sometimes they were days long, these garden parties, and the revelry would go on for days. We have a tent set up in the painting by Pater on the right. Both of these artists were at the forefront of the popularity of the fête galante, or garden party scene. Next slide, please. And one of my favorite paintings, star of the show, by an artist that probably many of us hadn't heard of before the show. I was so excited to see it that Philippe and the Bemberg Foundation had allowed this to travel. It's Michel-Ange Houas's Pin the Tail on the Donkey, or the Ass's Game, the Donkey's Game, from 1725. And Houas was short-lived. You can see he died before he was 50, and he was a very influential painter. He was French, but he worked primarily for the king of Spain, who was himself French, and he had a great impact on an artist of next generation, Francisco Goya. And Houas, like Goya, occupied the role of painter to the king. And so Goya would have known his works, and this is one of his most amusing and most beautifully painted of these courtly revelers. Again, that kind of idea of the fête galante, or the garden party. This time, it's the original version of Pin the Tail on the Donkey. And you can see that one of the revelers has, he hasn't dropped his bottle of wine. He's on the floor, he's on the ground, his donkey having tossed him, and the donkey is kicking off screen, so to speak, exiting stage left very rapidly, as the rest of the partiers don't seem too surprised or concerned over their friend's fall. And it is just a carefree and funny scene with a beautiful controlled palette and just almost a premonition of things to come at the royal court in Madrid, in the huge kind of genius figure of Goya later, who was a huge fan of Houas's work, quite clearly. If we could go to the next slide. And this, I believe, is my final slide. This is we had a sneak peek at this earlier, because there's the painting on the right was the final picture that we installed in the show, and it was quite an exciting moment when we finally got this 9-foot painting onto the wall, and we had a little bit of an applause because of the challenges that the entire team had faced doing things virtually over the course of the last year. This exhibition came together thanks to Roxana's work in record time, from the time it was being negotiated to the time it was being installed, safely and I think sensitively. And the paintings themselves are such a great kind of showstopper at the end of the exhibition, with the imaginary landscapes and make-believe architecture that suggests a very romantic view of the outdoors, and these were designed to fit in between doors on the interior of an aristocratic residence. So Hubert Robert was a master of bringing the outdoors indoors, so that these fantastical capriccios or imaginary landscapes could be enjoyed all year round. And he worked for Marie Antoinette and did similar paintings on this scale for her small palace on the grounds of Versailles, Le Trianon. But of course, his ties to the royal family ended up leading to his imprisonment after the French Revolution. And although he didn't, he decided not to flee like Vigée Lebrun. Like her, he eventually was reinstated, and actually, later chapter in his life, he was named curator of the Louvre, and so all that ends well, and so forth. He continued to enjoy great fame and commissions throughout his life, and I think that to end the exhibition with these great and really kind of serene, sunlit Mediterranean images are perfect to finally get to know Bemberg's sensibility and his eye. Even with large works, he's focusing on small details, like on the painting on the left, the shepherds passing through this unlikely kind of rock formation, or the solitary soldier who's up at the parapet on the tower in the painting on the right, which all suggest just a love of detail in paintings, and so for us, it was a fitting end to the show, and certainly the collector comes into a better focus, sharper focus, when you begin to make connections on your own from one painting to the next. And we hope that we've been able to do that, not just with the installation, but also the design of the show, the wall colors, and the order in which people can move through the space and enjoy it, both from the larger spaces in the gallery, which are devoted to outdoor pursuits, to a more intimate domestic feel to the gallery for interiors and intrigue. But whatever the case, each work offers its own mysteries that are waiting to be unraveled, and close looking is especially rewarded in each of the works in the Bemberg Foundation. So thank you for your support of the museum. Thank you for attending tonight. And I think that we're going to turn this over to Kate for questions. If you have any, I'd be happy to try to answer whatever questions you might have. Thank you again.
Thank you, Michael, for that truly wonderful presentation. I am so excited to get back into the galleries and see the exhibition again now that I have all this new information. So we have a couple of questions. I wanted to see if you would speak a little bit more about Bemberg's personal aesthetic. I mean, some of the things that you mentioned, the small details. It seems like he also had a fondness for strong personalities and for those amusing scenes. Like I really get a sense of humor in some of the pieces that you showed us today. But I'm wondering, as you got to know sort of his sensibility, how did that help you or hinder you in terms of distilling down into 4 sections for this exhibition?
I think that, another one of the challenges was not being able to see the collection before it arrived. So I was working with reproductions. That's a first for me. But in the end, I think that the works were strong enough that those details could be used to help determine what the sections were. You could probably guess that there are some works that could fit in more than one of the sections. But the selection, I think, was basically, he was a great lover of music and a musician. He was a trained pianist. And so not only did he enjoy the great personalities, which is definitely true, I'll get back to that in a sec, but he also very much enjoyed musical instruments in the paintings that he bought. So that's a thread. And that helped me to be able to arrange the works so that you could make that connection, even if it's not explicitly said. The personalities involved, yes. So starting with Sybil of Cleves, very strong, independent woman, to Lucas Cranach, who is, an outsized kind of, northern version of Titian or Raphael, that kind of thing, to the small groups of artists that would have known each other. He, I think, understood that Gerard David and some of the other Flemish 16th century artists in the show, they all knew each other. They were rivals. They were friends. In one case, one of the artists sued the other artist for taking some of his drawings. It's a crazy story. But yes, they all knew each other, and I think Bemberg enjoyed the fact that they either knew each other, or the later artists, say the 18th century artists, would have known the work of the earlier, say, Dutch interior painters. So he enjoyed making those connections. I can see through the collection, and that helped guide me on how to space the show and install it.
I love that. My next question actually is about those connections. How were you able to maintain those connections throughout the show once you actually made those choices? You've spoken to this a little bit, and I know that you mentioned earlier there's a connection with the letters, and the later French artist would have known the reference back to the earlier Dutch artist. But I'm curious to know, and also there's also something in the portraits especially that feels very modern. So this idea of connections across the centuries. So I wanted to know if you just speak a little more about that.
Yeah, I think that that there's definitely a modern sensibility in the choices of the especially the Renaissance portraits, because they're Italian, they're German, and Flemish primarily, and they share, even though some of them are done in different styles, they share an intensity of detail and a monochromatic, no distractions kind of background in the composition behind the sitter. And I think that Bemberg picked up on the fact that there were artists in Venice and artists in Northern Europe who had traveled to Venice that were working in very similar modes, but often with different materials at hand. So the fact that that some of the 18th century French artists also had political ties that endangered them and endangered their livelihood, at least. That also probably influenced the way that I installed the show, because I could return to the same story at certain intervals throughout different sections.
Thank you. My last question is, what galleries of the permanent collection should members and visitors go and see immediately after exiting this new exhibition?
One of the things that I was thinking about, not that I anticipated this question, but one of the things that I was thinking about just today was Colleen Smith and her appreciation, her dialogue with a 400-year-old Spanish, royal painter and painter to the Archbishop of Toledo, very intellectual artist, in the same way that Lucas Cranach was this intellectual painter in Saxony. And Colleen Smith's appreciation and the way that she transforms actually Sanchez-Cotan's work by being in dialogue with it is remarkably powerful. And I kind of go back to looking at the 200-year difference between some of the French artists that we see in Bemberg and their earlier Dutch counterparts is equally remarkable, because it shows how timeless art is. And Colleen Smith's reinterpretation of Sanchez-Cotan is something that I now appreciate even more, and because it again shows the timeless kind of dialogue over the centuries. The other gallery that I would really recommend would be Gallery 16, which has the Giorgione portrait, and Gallery 18 with our really important loan from the Timken Museum, the Gabriele Metsu letter writing scene with these undertones of love and romance, and it's a very quiet composition. And we also have a number of I mentioned the Rubens oil sketch. I think that would be great to compare with the Gian Domenico Tiepolo in the Bemberg Foundation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Michael. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and for taking our questions. Thank you to our members and our viewers at home for joining us this evening. We truly appreciate your support. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.